latest edition of the Mortal Kombat Franchise Documentary. I'm delighted this evening to be joined by the one and only Kerri Ann Hoskins, who played the role of Sonya Blade in Mortal Kombat 3, the video game, in 1995, Mortal Kombat 4 in 1997, Mortal Kombat Mythologies, and Mortal Kombat Special Forces, and also was one of the renowned stars of the Mortal Kombat Live show tour that toured all across the United States of America. I suppose, Kerri, if I can start back to you, Mortal Kombat, going back to the early 90s, I suppose, in terms of the arcade sort of steam, and it first came about in terms of the arcades. Were you aware of it? Were you one of those sort of arcade sort of finger happy sort of girls that like to sort of trust and see what she could come about, or in terms of Street Fighter, or did you know brothers or anything that were sort of bashing their buttons at Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, I mean?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you, Jim, for having me. And I can talk about how I got started into it, but as far as growing up, I was a tomboy. I spent a lot of time outside. My brother was in Golden Gloves, and at that time, girls weren't allowed. So I got to learn a little bit of boxing from my brother at home. We put the boxing gloves on. My dad would make, every time we were fighting, my dad would make us put on the gloves and start, punching each other. So that was my first taste of boxing and fighting, and I absolutely loved it. But as I got older, I got into more sports like gymnastics and karate and boxing and wrestling. I had a trainer from WWF train me on that kind of wrestling. And we did a lot of that, girl on girl wrestling stuff. And that was basically my background before Mortal Kombat came in. And I think I was about 23 or 24. And I was modeling for Playboy. And I actually got a job doing production with them and hair and makeup, and was working kind of behind the scenes and in front at the same time. And I happened to be in the office that day, and Jack Hagar, do you know who Jack Hagar is? He worked for Midway and Ballet at the time. He had called the office looking for a couple girls for this video game he was producing. It was called NBA Jam.
Okay.
And the people that had answered the phone, they said, "Hey, Kerri, do you want to take this? I have no idea what it's about." So I was talking to Jack on the phone, and I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it. I'll bring a friend and we'll see what happens." I had no idea what he was talking about, but it was just kind of, that moment of kismet, just by chance. I happened to be in the office, and Jack called, and so I showed up at Midway Ballet with my friend that day, and we shot the NBA Jam, and I had a blast. And after that, they kept on asking me back to do more video games because of my background. I was able to do a little bit of stunt work and stuff. So
I like NBA.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I suppose, Kerri, in terms of shooting that NBA Jam, obviously you made you made a good impression on sort of Jack. And did he have you sort of in mind in terms of Midway? Did they have you in mind in terms of Ed Boon and Mortal Kombat?
Not yet. After that, it was Revolution X with Aerosmith. We did that game, and I played 2 characters in that game. And then Mortal Kombat 3 came around. 1 and 2 had already come out, and they were looking for a new Sonya Blade for 3. And they asked me, and I said, I didn't know very much karate at that time. I had a little bit of Tang Sudo under my belt. And I just said, if you just have somebody on the side and show me the moves, I'll just copy them. Being in gymnastics and all that stuff, I was able just to kind of play it off and pretend I was Sonya at the time. But then I got a rude awakening when the live tour came around. I went on tour for, I was almost a year, but the training for that was really intense. We were up in the Catskill Mountains, and it was 12 hours a day for 3 months learning. And I remember at the time our choreographer was Pat Johnson. You might know him from Karate Kid, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, those movies, Mortal Kombat. And he, at the beginning, they really wanted me to be on the tour, But here, you know, I'm touring with all these black belts and stuff. And here I think I had like a yellow belt at the time. And Pat Boone, showing my age here, Pat Johnson said, you know, she's worthless. And so I had to prove myself. So I worked my ass off. You know, I'd get up before everybody in the morning and I'd do my workouts. And then while we were doing the training and stuff, every time I got knocked down, I'd get back up. And by the end of the training of the 3 months, Pat Johnson, you know, shook my hand and says I was wrong. And that meant so much to me because my hard work had paid off, and we had a blast on tour.
Hello, Kerri, can you hear me?
Yep. Did I lose you?
Just lost you there for a second. Kerri, in terms of Mortal Kombat, you got the role in 1995 in terms of Mortal Kombat 3. And I suppose that was about the time the first Mortal Kombat movie came out about as well. Was there ever any opportunities in that relation to that line, or was it strictly the video game?
That's a little sore subject for me.
Okay.
I was supposed to be up for the second movie, and
okay.
It was down to 3 girls, and I was one of the 3 girls, and there was just a little bit of political stuff going on there, and at that point I decided just, you know, to leave Hollywood behind and go home and have babies, and yeah, I left Hollywood scene, and I was kind of off the market for a long time. You know, I just kind of, after that, you know, Hollywood is dog eat dog, and it's who you know, and it's who you do, and all that stuff. And it wasn't me. So I just left Hollywood and went home and decided to have a
And I suppose, Kerri, in terms of Mortal Kombat, the sort of Sonya Blade character, she's very sort of iconic in terms of being one of the main sort of stars. When you first arrived in terms of the video game, and in terms of what sort of elements did you want to bring to the character in terms of, I suppose most of the character is scripted, but you always probably want to leave your own sort of mark on the character as well.
Yes. I think my biggest thing was strength and independence for women. And we did a lot of touring schools and stuff like that we did, you know, radio shows, we did for the live tour just to promote it. And we'd go from school to school, and I would be talking to these little girls who looked up to me. And I just wanted them to know you can do anything you want in life. You know, stay strong and be independent. Don't depend on somebody, depend on yourself.
And I suppose that, Kerri, I suppose we talk about global audiences and in terms of worldwide. And I suppose you mentioned there some of your background there. I suppose Playboy has a global sort of appeal to it. But were you sort of taken back by the appeal of Mortal Kombat in terms of its global appeal all over the world, receiving messages and fan email from all over the world from people in different countries playing Mortal Kombat and associating you with the character of Sonya Blade? Does it sort of take you back? I know being involved in Playboy, you might, in terms of that has a global audience, but were you a bit taken back in terms of the global reach of the video game that was Mortal Kombat?
I think I was most taken back just recently because back then, you know, the internet wasn't that big. Back in 95, you know, the most I got a taste of it was, you know, after the tour, I'd go out to the tour bus and I'd be, you know, attacked by all these kids wanting an autograph, and I would stay there until every single autograph was signed. I just relished in the moment, and I didn't want to disappoint any kids, you know, because they're looking at you like, please sign my autograph, my book, or whatever they had to sign. And some of my stage mates would get kind of mad at me because they wanted to, you know, get on the bus and get out, and I'd be like, nope, I'm staying here until every single last autograph is signed. And you know, sometimes it would take me a couple hours, and I knew that at that time, being, you know, age 25, I just wanted to relish in the moment because I wasn't sure if it was ever going to happen again. You know, I really thought this is my time and I'm going to enjoy it. And I don't want to disappoint anybody. And, you know, after I started having a family and stuff and on faith and that kind of stuff. And it didn't really, you know, it was mostly, you know, stuff from South America or stuff like that. And it didn't really hit me until just recently when I put that costume back on and it just went viral and it went all over the world and it went national. You know, I would Google myself and I would see all these articles, you know, from everywhere and people wanting to interview me. And I just really had no idea until just recently how global it was. And again, I'm just enjoying it again.
You mentioned the global appeal of Mortal Kombat, and Mortal Kombat is one of those video games back in the early 90s. Its big rival was sort of Street Fighter as such, produced by Jim Conlan, where Street Fighter failed to make the transition to the big screen in terms of TV series, in terms of movies. Mortal Kombat succeeded. Even a later stage, Tekken, another big fighting franchise, came along, produced by a big company, Namco. They tried their hand at it as well. They failed. Why do you think Mortal Kombat succeeded in terms of making the jump to the big screen? Even today still has that reach or that sort of real demand for TV series and movies in terms of Mortal Kombat, while other franchises like Tekken, Street Fighter, they tried their hand at it once, global iconic games, and they failed and they said, listen, we're going to stick to what we're best at.
Well, to be honest, I don't know that much about Street Fighter. I was so overwhelmed with Mortal Kombat at the time that I was just kind of in my own world. But does Street Fighter have real people in it? Did they start that way?
Yeah, there's a bit of sort of real characters in it, but I suppose it's more sort of, it tells a sort of narrow story. I suppose it doesn't have the sort of broad background in terms of dialect and content, I suppose, in terms of story that I suppose Mortal Kombat would have.
So we were just more prepared.
Yeah, I suppose so. Kerri, you mentioned that in terms of doing the suit for sort of Sonya Blade, and it's very sort of iconic, that sort of suit that you had, sort of stuff for when you were shooting that sort of video sort of franchise. Did you you mentioned putting it on there again, I suppose, to sort of bring back back sort of memories and flashbacks from the times shooting on the set? And were you still surprised today to even see the Sonya Blade outfit on you? Was it almost were you sort of quenching at the bite to go again for another sort of round at it?
I didn't realize it was going to affect me as much as it did. It was so nostalgic for me, and my two closest friends are the ones who talked me into doing it. You know, it had been 25 years, and every once in a while I would say, you know, I'm gonna put that costume back on, and they were like, yes, do it. And then I'd be like, nah, I have 4 kids, and I just, you know, I kind of felt silly because I just didn't feel like I could compare to 25 years ago when I was 25 years old, because now I'm 50. And I finally decided when I turned 50, you know, it's either now or never. I'm going to do this. You know, if I don't do it, I might regret it. And let's just set up this shoot and see what happens. And I was in the bathroom putting the costume on and putting my ponytail in and putting the headband on. And I kind of looked at myself and I just got like a little bit of choked up because it had been so long since I basically kind of pushed Sonya away for so long and was a mom. And it was really nostalgic for me. I loved it. I came out and my girlfriend just started clapping and I kind of felt silly. And then as soon as we started shooting, I just kind of went back into that role and it was just a blast for me. So I'm really
I suppose, Kerri, in terms of Mortal Kombat, I suppose the new movie is coming out in 2021, and it's supposed to be more R-rated, more back to the sort of hardcore sort of violence, more along the lines of the Dark Knight, sort of Joker as such. And is that where you think Mortal Kombat sort of belongs now in the sort of 21st century, where the movie industry has gone more sort of towards those darker sort of movies? And I suppose that really was Mortal Kombat. It was really a dark sort of a game, a sort of a real dark sort of sinister sort of world to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mortal Kombat was kind of one of the pioneers in that kind of stuff, and we spent a lot of time doing promotions explaining ourselves and why, the game was so violent at the time, and we kind of just turned it around as, this is martial arts. Fighting is the last thing you want to do. It's all about respect and discipline and that kind of stuff. And now I think it's just kind of a sign of the times, after Game of Thrones and all that stuff just went wild and everybody loved it, that I think they're just, nobody wants to reinvent the wheel right now. And there's a lot of just shock effect in movies, and, you got to keep up with the times.
Yeah, and I suppose, Kerri, in terms of Mortal Kombat, you mentioned being up for the movie Annihilation, and in terms of that, going back and seeing the Mortal Kombat movie the first one in 1995, before the sort of second one, I suppose it was iconic in terms of what it did in terms of martial arts, in terms of fighting game. And do you remember going to the cinema or watching the first movie, and what was your take on it?
We actually got a special screening when we were on tour. So we got to see it all together, and it was a lot of fun. We did a lot of cheering, and there was a couple of our stage mates that were actually in the movie. So when they would appear in the movie, we'd all start cheering, and it just, we were all kids back then, and we just had a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I suppose in terms of those sort of moves that you did in terms of Sonya, I suppose they're sort of iconic in terms of they've been sort of brought in to the game. In terms of working with Greenscape, I don't know if you worked with Greenscape back then in terms of the special sort of effects, and in terms of trying to hold sort of poses in terms of Sonya's sort of ability. How did you sort of find that at the time, imagining things that weren't there at present when you were sort of choreographing scripts and people doing sort of moves and holding their hands and stopping in sort of a sequence for like 30 or 40 seconds, and you have to pretend your sort of reactions. How was that sort of like for you coming into that sort of a world in terms of Mortal Kombat?
For me, it was kind of easy. They said, okay, do this, start and stop at the same point. If you're going to do a punch, you start this, you finish the same way you start, because they have to do that rotation. I think I remember the hardest thing was just the fighting stance where you're doing this, because your arms and your hands have to be exactly in the same spot from start to finish. And as far as like flips and stuff, that was just on a mat. You just do it up in the air and you fall flat on your back. It wasn't a big deal. It was just we spent a lot of time shooting and laughing, because there was a lot of screw ups, but there was just many successful shoots too.
And I suppose, Kerri, you mentioned there you have 4 children of your own, and I suppose that growing up in the sort of Mortal Kombat sort of universe, obviously your kids, when they reach the teenage sort of years in terms of the 10 or 11, but they obviously hear about Mortal Kombat, they hear about it in the Xboxes, the sort of PlayStations, and when they find out their mommy was actually sort of Sonya Blade, and in terms of their school friends, do you sort of just still get a bit chuffed that, wow, ma'am was Sonya Blade, or were there always reminders there in the house growing up, or posters or a bit of stuff where they could start to see your appearance as Sonya?
Kids never think you're cool. So even though their friends are saying, hey, your mom's Sonya Blade, they'd be like, yeah, so. So I think even just recently, my daughter was most impressed that, when I came out in this suit, she gained like 500 followers on Instagram. I think that was what impressed her most, because it trickled down to her, and, everybody's calling her Cassie now. So she's kind of like, she's got this role that she's been thrown into as Cassie Cage, and she's just like, what is this realm? You know? So I think right now it's hitting them more than it did when they were 12.
Mm.
Because I just never made a big deal out of it.
And I suppose, Kerri, I suppose Mortal Kombat is very much back in the context now, heading into 2021 with the new movie. And I suppose you mentioned there about being in demand again and people reaching out for you all over the world. Are you sort of enjoying the sort of buzz now and the hype that's coming with it, and the opportunities to speak to different people all over the world? You mentioned 25 years, and I suppose Mortal Kombat is like that in terms of the James sort of Bond franchise. It always goes on, and once you're part of that sort of furniture, no matter what role you played, you'll always be remembered. And apart from it 20 years on, it's probably different to other sort of computer games or sort of things like that. It has a long lasting sort of effect. So are you enjoying the whole sort of buzz now, the whole sort of the appeal of Sonya Blade very much, and Mortal Kombat very much back in the spotlight again?
I am. I really am. Like, one of my friends says, you're going to have to feed this monster. And it didn't really hit me until, everything went viral. And I don't think I've used Google Translate so much in the last month as I have in my whole life. I constantly get, direct messages and stuff. And I try to respond to them all. If it's something with some content and they're asking a question, I do try to respond to everybody. But yeah, I'm totally enjoying it. I love it.
And I suppose, Kerri, lastly, before I let you go, we have a release date now, April next year, for the new Mortal Kombat movie. Who knows with this current world, with the pandemic, if sort of affects what sort of screenings or what sort of shoot will be available. We have a release date. It will be released. Will you be one of those eagerly eyed looking on to see the new sort of Mortal Kombat movie, to see the 21st century Jessica McNamara, the Australian actress from Home and Away, her portrayal as Sonya Blade? And she follows a deep sort of legacy in terms of previous Sonyas. There only have been roughly around 3 or 4 of them. And you excited to see what she sort of brings to the Sonya character?
Oh, of course. I can't wait. I really can't wait. It's just so nostalgic for me. And for this game to be around for so long is just incredible. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of it. And I'm humbled. And, I do keep up with it, and I love it. I don't play it, kind of suck at that, but I love watching the movies, and I love seeing what it turns out to be. I love seeing how John and Ed have had their journey all these years, and it's just really, really cool. So yeah, I'm loving it, and I love watching anything that has to do with it.
On that note, Kerri Ann Hoskins, who played Sonya Blade in the Mortal Kombat 3 in 1995, but the original Sonya Blade on the Mortal Kombat Live Tour, which travelled all over the States. Very much delighted to speak to you, reliving those memories, bringing back that sort of nostalgia feeling. Great to see you decked out as Sonya Blade once again, and no doubt the demand is still rising. And who knows, maybe a future sort of cameo role, maybe in the offing again in terms of the franchise, in terms of a different sort of character for you down the line. But for the moment, Kerri Ann Hoskins, a pleasure talking to you, aka Sonya Blade.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim.
Thank you. Take care, Kerri.
Fight.